Yeah, Nintendo's probably not going to be happy with what I'm about to say, because one day your favorite Nintendo game might just disappear completely, not because you lost the cartridge, you couldn't find it anymore, or a friend came over and stole it, not because your Switch stopped working altogether, but because Nintendo decided that you don't need access to it anymore, that they as a company have moved on. You don't need access. And the truth is, it's already happening. So back in March of 2023, Nintendo shut down the Wii U and the 3DS eShops. Just flipped the switch overnight. More than 1,000 digital games became completely inaccessible. No backups, no way to re-download, just gone. And here's the kicker. Over 450 of those games were exclusive to those systems. No physical editions, no ports, no preservation at all. Erased from gaming history completely. Now, if that doesn't alarm you, it should, because this isn't a one-time event. It's the latest step in a pattern. I mean, Nintendo, the company with arguably the richest legacy in gaming history, is doing shockingly little to preserve it. Worse than that, in many cases, they're actively erasing that history.
You can have all the power and excitement of Nintendo right in the palm of your hand.
And by the way, if you think this is a problem and it's just about old games, that's all we're talking about, or just digital storefronts, then think again, you're missing the point. Because the same mentality that shut down the Wii U and the 3DS libraries is now bleeding into the Nintendo Switch 2 era, and most players don't even realize it. Now, I've been watching this unfold for a while, and in this video, we're going to break down what's really happening with Nintendo's approach to preservation, how they've gone from physical first to ephemeral, how game keycards might be the biggest bait and switch of the modern era, and why fans, not Nintendo, are now the last line of defense in saving video game history. So buckle up, everyone, because this isn't just a video about nostalgia. This is a warning to all of us about ownership. And Nintendo has always had a complicated relationship with its own legacy. I mean, it's a company that is built on nostalgia, but doesn't know exactly how to preserve that nostalgia for future generations, or the generations that grew up loving the systems. On the one hand, no company in the world has done more to shape the history of video games. Think about it. From the NES to the Nintendo Switch, Nintendo's hardware generations are cultural landmarks. Mario, Zelda, Metroid, Pokemon, these franchises just aren't successful. They're foundational. They've built theme parks now as a result of it. They've defined what video games are for multiple generations of players. Heck, when Astro Bot won Game of the Year last year, the developer stood up on stage and thanked Nintendo for setting the standard for what platformers should be for generations of players and for the industry at large. But while Nintendo has built an empire on nostalgia, it never really has known what to do with it. Not long term, not in a way that respects preservation. It's kind of shocking, actually. So let's go back to the early days, the NES, the SNES era. Back then, preservation wasn't even a question because ownership was preservation. You know, having these cartridges in my hand, having my, Kid Icarus cartridge in my hand was preservation. You know, you bought a cartridge, it worked forever. No server required, no patch needed, no DRM. I could lend this to my friends if I wanted to, and that was a huge mistake back then because a lot of times we'd never see those cartridges again. And I have to, hand to the heavens, I was looking through my cartridges today, and there might be one or two that I never owned and they're somehow in my collection. How did they wind up at my house? How do they wind up in my attic? And the cartridges themselves were practically indestructible. I mean, you could find an old NES cartridge in the back of your closet 30 years later, blow the dust off of it, clean the pins, and it would still play. Even back then, Nintendo was already sitting on a gold mine of timeless games, but they didn't exactly keep them in circulation. You couldn't buy NES games during the N64 era. You couldn't walk into a store, find Super Nintendo classics on shelves, unless, of course, it was a secondhand game store. By contrast, look at Sega. Well, they flamed out of the console race, and I hope they someday maybe get back into it, I don't know. Sega has spent years repackaging, preserving its legacy, from Genesis compilations on every platform to official Steam releases, even collections bundled with physical extras. Heck, I just downloaded a bunch of the Sega classics on my iPhone last week before they pulled those offline, stopped supporting them. But nevertheless, if I look up here and I even look at my PS3 collection, or I look at my Switch collection, I've got Sega collections of all these games in these old systems right here, preserved. And they keep releasing them, so we have access to them. Sega, of all companies, understood the value of keeping their old catalog accessible for future generations. You know, you want to play Sonic, you want to jump in and play Golden Axe, you can do that. Nintendo, they've often acted like their back catalog is a vault to be cracked open only when it suits them and only on their terms. Think about it. It's sort of like Disney. I remember when I worked at the video game store, and we also sold movies. It was a movie video game store called Saturday Matinee. And I remember when Disney was getting ready to do re-releases of some of their classic films, they would bring out these new clamshells, and we knew Disney was going into their vault to give us Peter Pan or to give us The Lion King or whatever it happened to be, The Little Mermaid, and you better buy it right now for a limited time because they're going to be gone. They're going to be gone for many, many years, and we don't know when we're going to open the vault again. Of course, now Disney is all in on streaming, and they're making as much money as they can month after month after month on Disney+. Now, to be fair with Nintendo, there were some bright spots, right? The Game Boy Advance, for instance. I have a lot of remakes of classic Mario games that they put out on those small cartridges on the Game Boy Advance. The GameCube gave us the Legend of Zelda Collection Edition, a disc that included Zelda 1, Zelda 2, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, all in one box. Then, of course, and we also, even on the Nintendo Switch, we got Mario All-Stars. So we got Super Mario Sunshine, we got Super Mario Galaxy all on one cartridge, and then that thing fizzled out, and now to buy that, it's like over $100 if you can even find a copy of it. We also had the Wii, right? The Virtual Console. Arguably Nintendo's greatest preservation effort ever. For the first time, players could legally buy and download NES, SNES, N64, TurboGrafx, Sega Genesis, even Commodore 64 games. Am I missing any in this mix? I know there was a few. Maybe you could get Saturn games. I don't remember, but there was a lot of consoles that you could buy games, and you could download them directly to your Wii. And I bought a lot of them. I mean, I spent a lot of money on a lot of those old games, buying Kid Icarus. You know, I own Kid Icarus, but how much easier is it to play it on the console that's currently plugged into your television? I don't want to have to go rooting through the attic to dig out my old NES, or to buy an analog from the analog company, like their version of the NES, which I have, and yes, it's hooked up over there. So, but I'm weird, okay? I am not the normal person. So if I've got a Wii, can I play Super Mario Brothers? Can I play Mario Brothers? Can I play Donkey Kong? Can I play all of these classic games right there on my Wii U? Turn the controller sideways and I've got a D-pad and buttons and I can play these classic games. It was great. You paid for the games. They were yours, kind of. They're digital downloads. You know, it felt like Nintendo had finally sort of embraced the idea of access to their entire library, and then suddenly they were gone. Sorry, gone. Your old purchases don't carry over to the Nintendo Switch. But here's the thing with Nintendo, it just feels like just as they get it, they understand it, they pivot, they change. The Wii U continued the Virtual Console. It was sort of clunky and fragmented. You had to re-buy the games that you already purchased on the Wii, and I did that again. I purchased a few of those classics that I wanted to play them again, Excitebike, Kid Icarus. Why did I do that? I don't know. I'm a glutton for punishment. Certain platforms like N64 had limited representation on that platform. It felt less like a celebration of history and more like a half-hearted rollout. Then the 3DS launched its own version, again, separate from the Wii U, no cross-buying, okay? No unified library. You could own the same game 3 times across 3 different platforms. The Wii, the Wii U, and the 3DS. And each time, Nintendo would gladly charge you for it each time, and we're gluttons, and we would pay for it because we wanted it on our handheld. We wanted it in portable mode. By the mid-2010s, fans started to feel the fatigue. And then, of course, came the Nintendo Switch. In 2017, the Switch marked a huge turning point, but not in the way that fans had hoped, not in the way that I had hoped. Instead of building on the Virtual Console experience, Nintendo scrapped it entirely. Retro games were now locked behind a subscription. the Nintendo Switch Online service, and multiple levels of it. You only get access to certain consoles with the Nintendo Switch Online, but you go for that extended version, and of course you get all the additional systems. And this is where the story really starts to go sideways, at least for me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments below, because from this point on, Nintendo's approach to preservation isn't about ownership anymore, it's all about control. And what comes next are the closures, the key cards, the empty boxes. It signals a full retreat from the company's preservation legacy. They're basically giving a big middle finger to preservation, saying we don't care about it. Because in Nintendo's eyes, nostalgia isn't something to be honored, even though it should. And I would argue nostalgia is actually really powerful. And I've done research on nostalgia, because sometimes you wonder, am I living too much in the past? Am I hurting myself by doing that? In fact, I dove into the research on nostalgia. It turns out no, nostalgia is actually really good for you. It brings happiness into your life. Now, if you're fully devoted to living in the past, that can be a problem. But if you can tap into those memories that bring happiness and joy into your life, like those summer afternoons where I was in my basement playing Metroid when it was blazingly hot outside. I had done swim practice that morning, I had mowed my parents' lawn, and I just wanted to sit in my basement and try to beat Mother Brain. Like, that's not a bad memory. In fact, that brings me great joy. And then to be able to pick up my Metroid cartridge and hold it and look at the manual and flip through my Nintendo Player's Guide and study those maps and just beautiful. It's powerful, and Nintendo doesn't understand that. They think of it as something to be monetized again and again and again. When the Nintendo Switch launched in 2017, it felt like a total reset, not just for the hardware itself, right? They were saying, hey, we kind of screwed up with the Wii U, now we perfected it with the Nintendo Switch. What they did, though, they reset their entire philosophy, it seemed. Gone was the clunky Wii U tablet, the fractured user interface, the confusion of a dual-screen gameplay. Some games would take advantage of it, others wouldn't. It was there just kind of as an add-on. You couldn't go very far away from the screen. It had to have this weird connection. Anyway, the Switch was sleek, simple, fast. It blended handheld, home console gaming in a way that finally made sense. I would argue, and my personal opinion is, it's the greatest console ever made, the Switch. I have an incredible library of games. I think the library is second to none. I think that console experience is second to none. To be able to take it portably on the go, put a cartridge in while you're at the airport, and the game just fires up and plays. No calling out to a server somewhere to download, to confirm that you own the game. It just plays the game. It's an amazing console. But alongside all of that excitement came a quiet omission, one that signaled a troubling shift in how Nintendo viewed its own legacy. There was no virtual console anymore, no retro storefront, no option to buy individual NES, SNES, or N64 games like we could on the Wii or the 3DS. No carryover of your digital library. It was a clean slate whether you wanted one or not. Start fresh. Well, how am I going to buy these games? Well, it turns out you can't. Instead, Nintendo introduced something new, Nintendo Switch Online, a subscription service like Netflix.
Enjoy more games, more features, and more fun with Nintendo Switch Online.
Offers access to a rotating library of retro games, starting with NES titles, then eventually expanding to the Super Nintendo, N64, Game Boy Advance for the expansion pack, if you want to pay extra for those. And now, of course, most recently, the GameCube with the launch of the Switch 2. So Nintendo is saying, hey, look, we appreciate the GameCube, right? We're going to launch a brand new controller for the GameCube. Wouldn't it be amazing if I could actually buy GameCube games again, even if only digitally, on that storefront that could carry over for years and years and years to come? So they understand this, at least they half understand it seems. So this access to these games comes with huge strings attached, right? You couldn't buy the games, you couldn't own them, you couldn't back them up. If your subscription ended, so did your access. So it was a subtle but significant change. Preservation was no longer about ownership, it was about permission. In other words, you were renting these games. And for those of us who grew up in the 80s and the 90s, that idea feels eerily familiar. Remember going to Blockbuster, Hollywood Video, and renting an NES cartridge or an SNES cartridge for the weekend? I used to rent Genesis games as well. You could play for hours, maybe even if a game allowed you to have a save file and it wasn't, that crazy password system that like Metroid used. You had to write oh my God, I had papers which just filled with like passwords written down, So if you had a battery save file game, you go back like the next weekend hoping that no one had erased your file, praying that you could get the same cartridge again and again. It's funny, I even heard John from Spawnwave talking about this the other day. He mentioned he would return, I think, an N64 cartridge, and he put like a little mark with a pen on it so that he knew if he went back, he'd try to get the same cartridge and hope that no one had erased his game save. Yeah, me too. I know exactly what he's talking about. So you could keep playing that game. But you didn't own the game. Blockbuster did. You were just borrowing it. And then the eShop shutdowns began. In early 2022, Nintendo announced that the Wii U, the 3DS eShops would be permanently closing. Players would no longer be able to buy digital games for either platform. The completionist, you remember that guy? Remember that guy, the completionist? He did whole videos about the importance of game preservation, and little do we know what was going on behind the scenes with that guy. But anyway, he did a whole thing where he bought all of the 3DS games for the purposes of game preservation. He seemed like a hero. Yeah. And even after March 2023, even download codes would stop working. Once the shutdown was complete, and any game that wasn't backed up physically or already downloaded would be gone for good. So maybe you had a whole bunch of games, like I've got a whole bunch of downloaded games on my 3DS right over there. Because at the last minute, I was like, oh my God, I want to be able to go, and I specifically bought games that I knew I couldn't get elsewhere. And I knew that I had to download them now or they'd be gone for good. So that 3DS is loaded up with a whole bunch of games. But guess what? If that battery dies or this system craps out, or I lose it, these games are gone for good. So let's break down the numbers. According to research done by the Video Game History Foundation and VGC, over 1,000 digital-only titles were removed from legal purchase when those stores shut down. And of those, 450 were exclusive to those platforms, meaning they were never released physically, no cartridge, no disc, no way to preserve them outside of piracy. I mean, let that sink in for a moment. Nintendo, one of the richest, most powerful entertainment companies in the world, wiped out hundreds of games in a single policy change. No formal archive, no preservation plan, just deleted, gone. Sort of like Disney with their Vault. Will they ever release them again? Probably not. Maybe they'll release them at some point on the Nintendo Switch Online, which will pay for a monthly subscription or a yearly subscription. And it wasn't just shovelware titles, there were experimental indie games, DSiWare titles, virtual console releases of retro games that still aren't on the Nintendo Switch, quirky first-party oddities like Rusty's Real Deal Baseball, which is a Nintendo-published game that literally can't be played anymore because it relied on a now-defunct microtransaction server, their real sort of first attempts at these like microtransactions. It's a fascinating piece of gaming history. Even fan-favorite franchises weren't safe. Fire Emblem Fates, for instance, had multiple routes, one of which was digital only, and now it's gone. Pushmo, brilliant Nintendo-developed puzzle series, gone. Harmo Knight, rhythm game from Game Freak, gone. Dylan's Rolling Western, gone. I bought it digitally because I knew it would be gone, so now it sits over there on the 3DS. So the reaction from fans was a mix of outrage and heartbreak. Petitions were launched, video essays flooded YouTube, preservationists sounded the alarm, but Nintendo didn't respond. There was no apology, no plan to port games forward, no statement about preserving the art form, just silence. They weren't going to admit at some point maybe we'll bring the 3DS over to Nintendo Switch Online or the expansion pack. Nothing. So it was in this moment that many fans realized, including myself, that Nintendo doesn't just fail to preserve its own history, sometimes it's actively erasing its own history. And what makes this even more frustrating is how inconsistent the policy is. For years, players have been told that buying digital games was the future, that we were transitioning away from physical media because digital was more convenient. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Digital only works when the company behind it wants to keep it working. I mean, that's the initiative for Stop Killing Games right now. And increasingly, Nintendo doesn't care. Their entire infrastructure is built around generational silos. When a new console launches, the old one is effectively abandoned. No cross-buy anymore. No unified accounts. No backwards compatibility. You're expected to start over again and again and again. Now, fortunately, with the Switch 2, we have backwards compatibility, and that has been honestly really, really important for me even deciding to purchase a Switch 2. If there was no backwards compatibility, and we're buying game key cards, you can bet damn sure that I'm not buying a Switch 2. I bought the Switch 2 because now my entire Switch 1 collection will be improved upon. And now I'll be able to play those games on an improved experience, an improved console with better frame rates and all of that. It's kind of like I'm buying a Switch Pro, not even a Switch 2, if you want to get technical about it. So that's not preservation, that's a business model. And it's one that puts every digital-only Nintendo title, past, present, future, on borrowed time. If digital storefronts are quietly disappearing, if that wasn't enough of a red flag for you, then Nintendo has found a new way to undermine game preservation. And this time they're doing it with something that looks like physical media, but isn't, which is enter the game key card. Those cartridges that come in a standard Nintendo Switch case, shrink-wrapped, retail-ready, but instead of containing an actual playable game, they contain a glorified download trigger, a license key, no data, no game, just a plastic pointer telling your console to go ahead and connect to the internet, download the game from a server. Oh, you don't have internet access because you're on an airplane flight? Sorry. You're at the airport and you bought it at one of those electronics stores and you want to buy a game. I mean, that's actually one of the benefits of buying Switch games. You can see Switch games at the airport. I often would buy one for my children before a flight because they're like, oh, can we get this game, you know? Sure, and guess what? You pop the cartridge right in and you can play it. Not anymore. Now let's be clear, these aren't clearly labeled games either. When you look at the Switch case of the Switch 2 case, it's hard to even see, like here's Mario Kart World, this is a full physical game on cartridge, but down here you got that little white banner that said this is a game key card. That little white banner is quickly becoming like one of the scourges of the industry right now. Most people don't even realize what they're buying until they open the box. Most people don't even see that little white box at the bottom. Some publishers have the decency to include that little disclaimer, usually in that small print, download required or game not included on the cartridge. But most of the time it's subtle. I would even say it's deceptive. You think you're buying a game, what you're really buying is just access. Now, I recently made a whole video about this, and the response was actually pretty overwhelming from you guys. The comments were pretty stunning. It turns out that a lot of us are fed up with this bait and switch with these game key cards. People commented that they bought a game at a retail store only to find out that they needed to download 20 plus gigabytes before they could even play the game. Others said they were pissed off that they tried to return the cases because they had already opened it, only to be denied by the store because they had technically opened the product and now they only got like a, credit to the store or something like that. Some even shared like darker realization, like what happens years from now when these servers go offline and I want to play this game? It's going to call out to a server for me to download the game and play it there. What if it's not there anymore? Sorry. You've got a hunk of plastic, that cartridge becomes totally worthless. I mean, this isn't theoretical. We're already seeing examples of it, right? Like games that would use key cards, especially third-party releases. What happens if they get delisted or lose back-end server support? What happens when the cartridge doesn't degrade like an old disc or become unplayable from wear and tear? It just becomes a silent brick. Can't even play it. A fossil, a piece of plastic with no value at all, except maybe as shelf decoration. It's one of the things right now to go digital and know that you're buying a non-physical product. Like if you're on Steam or you're on the Steam Deck and you know exactly what you're buying. Right now, Valve is great, Steam Deck is great, but what happens if Valve becomes a public company? What happens when all of these DRM'd games that you bought on your Steam library are suddenly yanked? We saw that with Amazon when people were buying Kindle books. And suddenly they went to their library and realized that Amazon had decided to literally remove the book that they had bought from their own library. Imagine someone walking into my house and taking a book off of my shelf because someone deemed it, part of an industrial censorship complex now because of some political regime, right? You can't read that book. And that's really what's at the heart of this, too. It's this digital censorship. It's another thing entirely, though, to think that you're buying a real cartridge, something preservable, resellable, timeless, and instead you receive a license tethered to a server that won't be around forever. And make no mistake about it, as we saw with the Wii U, the Virtual Console, the 3DS, eShops, all of that, they won't be around forever. I started playing BioShock on the PS3 a couple days ago. I'm about halfway through it now, and I opened up my game cartridge that I have up there for my PS3, popped the disc into my PS3, and the full game is there. And I've been having an absolute blast playing the original BioShock. No server required. Everything just plays beautifully. So again, I don't have to rely on any kind of servers or infrastructure in order to play that game. And the same will be the true 5 years from now. What's truly insulting is how easy it is for Nintendo to do the right thing. Case in point, Cyberpunk 2077, a massive graphical game, beautiful, it's intense, unbelievable world. I did a whole review of my experience playing it on the Switch too. And guess what? CD Projekt Red did. They put the entire game on the cartridge. No downloads, nothing at the bottom of the case that says game keycard. The full game is here, including the Phantom Liberty DLC, which came out a few years later. No downloads, no patches required to launch the game. Yeah, now CD Projekt Red has rolled out a new update 2.3 for the game. Great. I didn't play it with the 2.3 upgrade. I played it without that. Now I could download an upgrade if I want to, and it'll be stored in my Nintendo Switch memory area, but I don't have to do that. I don't even have to connect to the internet at all. There's no game keycard trickery here, just old school, plug it in and play simplicity. And the response? Overwhelmingly positive. Collectors loved it. Preservationists praised it. I mean, you had even Digital Foundry, even just from the technical perspective, was marveling at its performance on the Switch 2. Fans bought the game. On that 64 gigabyte cartridge, they were able to fit the entire game. And people bought it in large numbers, by the way. I'm going to do a deep dive video on this. You've been asking me to do it. I will do it specifically on CD Projekt Red and Cyberpunk on the Switch 2. I'm fascinated by it because that's all people are asking for, the ability to buy a game and actually own it and play it. Now compare that to Nintendo's own practices. Even some of Nintendo's first-party releases have fallen into this trap. Metroid Prime Remastered had a physical version, yes, but the rollout was staggered. Remember, they shadow dropped it digitally on the eShop, and me, of course, I ran right over to the eShop and bought it digitally, but I had to wait 2 weeks to be able to pick it up physically, which I have a physical copy up here on my shelf. Oh, and by the way, I should point out that I ended up buying 2 more physical copies, one for my son for Christmas and one for my nephew for Christmas. My nephew still hasn't finished the game, by the way. I always rag on him about that. Every time he's on a call with my son, I say, "Did you finish Metroid Prime Remastered yet?" He's like, "Not yet, I'm stuck." But my son beat it. But he has the physical copy, and he has it on his shelf. Bayonetta 1 was released physically in Japan, but in the United States it was a download code, then it was stuffed into the Bayonetta 2 case. Pikmin 1 and 2. Physical release was delayed, and then it wasn't even sold separately. It was bundled together in a physical case, which is fine. I mean, people can feel however they want about that. I actually prefer the games to be separated, but bundles look fine, I guess. Like I had that BioShock 1 and 2 in one case on the PS3, so I get it. Less shelf space. But more and more, we're seeing an unsettling trend. Physical boxes with no game inside at all. Whether it's a code in the box between physical and digital components, like the Spyro Reignited trilogy. Now, my kids got that for me for Christmas, and they were super excited about it, and I was too, and then I glanced down at the bottom, and it says, download required. Because I think only one of the games is on the cartridge, and the other 2 you have to download separately. So, or game keycards. Nintendo is conditioning its audience to accept physical products that have no permanence at all anymore. And this is the kind of behavior that we used to mock in the mobile gaming space, right? This is the kind of thing that people warned us about Steam when Steam took off, the idea that one day we wouldn't own our games at all. You own a license to a game. Again, what happens if Valve becomes a public company and shareholders decide that You know, they don't like them selling these kind of risque fighting games. We're seeing that now with MasterCard and payment processors who are telling Valve and other companies what games they can and cannot sell because, you know what, we're just not going to do credit card transactions because we don't like the game. Who's to say? These companies don't want you to own anything. They want to have total control. And now Nintendo, a company built on physical hardware and iconic cartridges, is leading the charge into a future where plastic packaging is a lie. I mean, let's call it what it is. It's an anti-preservation by design. It is anti-preservation by design. Because if you don't own the game, you can't preserve it. You can't pass it down. You can't trade it. You can't keep it on your shelf and play it 10 years from now. You're at the mercy of Nintendo's servers, licensing deals, willingness to maintain access. We see all the time Sony and PlayStation Plus, Xbox Game Pass, games come in, games leave. I mean, how many times do we report, like, I know The Witcher 3 is a game that's about to be removed from the PlayStation Network. So if you haven't played it already, gone. Sorry. CD Projekt Red licensing, it's being removed. So the digital version of that on PSN, gone. And history has shown time and time again that when a game is no longer profitable, Nintendo moves on. The Eshop closures prove that. Game key cards are the next step. The mask is totally off. So if Nintendo refuses to preserve its own legacy, who's going to do it? Well, that's the uncomfortable questions that fans have been asking for years, and increasingly the answer is us, we will, the community, the emulators, the archivists, the passion players that keep gaming history alive in forums and in basements and GitHub threads and dusty old hard drives that I've got lined up here with ROM files. But let's be real, most people don't turn to ROMs because they want to steal games. They do it because they have no other option. The game is delisted. The console is obsolete. The eShop has been shut down. The cartridge now costs $500 on eBay. I mean, you want to buy Path of Radiance for the GameCube? Good luck. $400 if it's in good condition. Now you could play Path of Radiance on the Nintendo Switch Online Experience expansion pack in the GameCube section, but you don't own it. Or worse than all of this, the game never even got a physical release to begin with, so you're sort of stuck in this digital environment. And more fan communities are the last line of defense when it comes to game preservation. Take Mother 3, for example, one of the Nintendo's most infamous failures, released in 2006 for the Game Boy Advance. It was only released in Japan. It was never localized, despite years of fan outcry. So what happened? Well, fans stepped up. A full English translation patch was created, distributed freely. It was done with care, with respect to the game, with zero profit motive. It introduced one of the most emotionally resonant stories that Nintendo has ever produced to an entirely new audience. Nintendo's response to all of this? Silence, crickets, nothing. My friend John from the Happy Console Gamer just played it, I think last year, I think for the first time, and was absolutely blown away by how incredible the game was. But it's not available to normal people. Or look at AM2R, another Metroid 2 remake, a stunning fan-made reimagining of the original Metroid 2 from the Game Boy era. It modernized the visuals, revamped the controls, honored the spirit of the franchise. A lot of people feel like it's even better than the original release. It was free. It was a passion project released to Windows. The next day after he released it, he was hit with a DMCA takedown from Nintendo. And anyone who was distributing it was also hit with it. So gone. Even emulators themselves, tools essential to the work of preservation, have been aggressively targeted. Dolphin, one of the most respected emulators for the GameCube and the Wii, preparing for a release on Steam in 2023. It would have been, given players an easy legal path to emulate their own physical discs that they owned. You have a GameCube disc, you want to play it on your PC? Here you go. But Nintendo stepped in, shut it down, citing potential privacy issues, despite Dolphin requiring users to supply their own game. And then in 2024, Nintendo went after Yuzu, the most popular emulator for the Nintendo Switch. The lawsuit ended in a $2.4 million settlement. Yuzu was taken offline. Not just the website, the entire GitHub repository, all associated assets were wiped out. Nintendo then issued thousands of DMCA takedowns to make sure that Yuzu copies across the web were wiped out. I'm less upset about this, to be honest with you. At the end of the day, it was still a modern console. It was still selling games. So I've never emulated any Switch games. I've never had to do that. I've never used Yuzu or Ryujinx, which is another major Switch emulator. Under pressure, the developers there voluntarily took their project offline, just like that. Two of the most advanced and preservation-focused tools for Nintendo's current generation of games were gone. Not because they were selling anything, but because Nintendo views control as more important than access. Again, if you can get a lot of these Nintendo Switch games, of course, that are available in physical form, then I'm not so keen on the privacy angle for modern consoles where you can go to the store and actually buy the game. But for all of those systems where we can't get access to these games anymore, there's no way to get them, and there's no way to have ownership of them, that's a totally different animal for me. But here's the bitter irony of all of it. Nintendo uses emulators themselves. The NES, the SNES Classic consoles, built on emulation. The Virtual Console, emulation. Nintendo Switch Online, also emulation. Nintendo has no problem using these tools to monetize its legacy as long as they're the ones in control. In fact, the Video Game History Foundation said it best: when companies abandon their own history, fans will preserve it, whether they're allowed to or not. And that's the ethical gray zone we live in right now. Fans aren't trying to steal, they're trying to save, they're trying to carry gaming history forward. Because let's be honest, if the fans don't do it, no one will. And let's also be honest, yet there are plenty of people who like to steal. So there are people who will just steal because they don't want to buy Donkey Kong Bonanza, for $70 on a cartridge. If they could steal it, they probably would. But anyway, so there are bad apples out there, to be fair. But here's the thing, it doesn't have to be this way. Nintendo isn't some scrappy startup that's trying to make ends meet. This is one of the richest, most iconic entertainment companies on the planet. They have the resources, they have the catalog, they have the fan base to build gold standard for video game preservation if they wanted to. And ironically, their competitors have already laid out the blueprint. I mean, look at Microsoft with Xbox. They made backward compatibility a pillar of their ecosystem. Hundreds of Xbox 360 games, even original Xbox games, run on Series X and S hardware, often with resolution boosts, performance improvements, no extra cost if you already own the game. They didn't need to do that. It didn't generate billions in revenue, but it did earn a lot of goodwill. A lot of game fans, true gaming fans, were thrilled what Microsoft was doing here, and it kept gaming history alive. Sony, for all its missteps, has taken some moves towards preservation in recent years. Their revamped PlayStation Plus subscription has PS1, PS2, PSP games in it, of course, but again, you're paying for that subscription, so not terribly fair. But a lot of your old stuff, like your trophies, like I was playing on my PS3 and all of that kind of stuff, carries forward to the PS5. So, and by the way, I should point out, when Sony was going to shut down the PS3 and Vita stores, the backlash actually worked. Sony reversed the decision. They listened. Even smaller publishers are putting Nintendo to shame. Companies like Limited Run Games, Strictly Limited, or Super Rare are actually pressing physical copies of obscure and retro titles, sometimes for the first time ever. They're proving that there is a market for preservation, that people will pay for complete offline, on-the-cartridge versions of games, not just nostalgia wrapped in DRM. I mean, heck, why do I have to buy the Castlevania Dominus collection from Limited Run? Really? I mean, I did, and I actually, Limited Run gets a lot of bad PR and stuff, but I think they've come around, and I appreciate what they're doing for game preservation. I do. And so I do buy a lot of stuff from Limited Run. Yeah, I guess that's my cross to bear. So what could Nintendo do? Could they reintroduce the Virtual Console with a la carte purchasing of classic games? Could they tie it to my previous purchases on the Wii U and the Wii? Maybe in the 3DS as well? Could they offer full game cartridges with zero reliance on post-purchase downloads? Preserve eShop titles by porting them forward or archiving them on NSO? Working with third-party publishers to make sure that complete editions exist physically and digitally? And maybe most importantly, stop attacking fans who are there trying to preserve the very video games that Nintendo itself has totally abandoned. None of these things would require reinventing the wheel. The infrastructure exists, the talent exists, the demand absolutely exists, as you're seeing by this blowback for the game keycard situation. So what's missing? What's missing is the will to do it, because right now, Nintendo isn't making choices based on preservation or respect for history. They're making decisions based on maximum control and short-term monetization right now. And it's costing us. So why does any of this matter? I mean, why make a 20, 30-minute video ranting about cartridges, emulators, and games from 30 years ago? Well, first of all, I'm passionate about it, as you can tell. But because this isn't just about old games, it's about memories. It's about ownership. It's about whether the things that shaped our childhood, our creativity, our relationships, will still exist in 10 or 20 years, or whether they'll be locked away, forgotten, deleted by a company that didn't see the profit margin in preserving them. I mean, for me, this isn't theoretical. I've lived through this timeline. Like I said earlier, I've marked the eras in my life with Nintendo consoles. Not exclusively, of course, but I remember being a kid, saving up my allowance, riding my bike to the mall, to buy a new NES game. I remember being sick from school one day and my mom took me to the mall. It was right around my birthday. And she said, pick out 2 games that you want. And she bought me a football game, and I think I got John Elway's Quarterback, and I got RC Pro-Am. I loved it. I remember the first time that I sat and beat Metroid. I remember opening the gold cartridge version of Legend of Zelda on Christmas morning. I remember playing Smash Brothers with friends in college and playing Mario Kart with friends after work as I was older. I loved watching my own son with a Nintendo Switch beat Super Mario Odyssey for the first time, the first game that he ever completed on his own. These moments, stick with you. But, here's the hard truth. The games that created those memories are under threat, not because they're physically falling apart or deteriorating, but because Nintendo is choosing to restrict access, choosing to erase games from digital shelves, fragment libraries, split physical releases, treat preservation like a nuisance instead of a responsibility. And I get it, Nintendo is a business. They're not obligated to keep every game online forever. But when you're the steward of some of the most iconic games in video game history, is there a higher standard here? To me, there is. There should be, because video games aren't just products, they're art, they're culture. They're the stories that we grew up with. And if Nintendo won't preserve that legacy, then it falls to us, the players, the fans, the collectors, the preservationists, to do it ourselves. Through emulation, through archiving, through support of companies that still believe physical media matters. And they're out there. We can't stop this trend on our own, but we can push back, we can raise awareness, we can ask for better, we can reward companies that are doing it right and hold accountable the ones that aren't. There's a YouTube channel that I love called Physical Paradise that Jordan runs out of China. And he catalogs and talks about all of the new physical game releases that are coming out on a regular basis. And he's got a nice subscriber base. And if people pay attention to that, and if publishers understand that there's a large contingency of people out there who would buy physical games, maybe they'd be more inclined to actually release these games physically. So if you've ever bought a Switch game and been surprised to find a download code instead of a cartridge, if you've ever tried to re-download a game and found that it was gone, I know you bought it, sorry, servers are closed. If you've ever wondered, whether your kids or grandkids will be able to play the classics that you grew up on, then this matters to you, and it matters to me as well, because game preservation isn't just about saving old data, it's about protecting the stories that made us who we are. When we woke up on Christmas morning and we were able to pick up, Mega Man for the first time and be able to play that game, or, Kid Icarus for the first time, and to open this box and to pull that manual out and then be able to sit for hours on Christmas Day to be able to play those games. That's what matters. And I should say before I wrap up, there are some companies doing it right, and I want to support them. I mean, for instance, Mod Retro, they're the makers of the Chromatic. This comes bundled with Tetris inside. They've been releasing these Game Boy style new games, and I've been getting them. And I've been supporting what Chromatic has been doing with these new games for their essentially a Game Boy brand new, beautiful Game Boy on the chromatic. Baby T-Rex. You know, this is a new physical game. Chante. And there's a few more that were just announced. So support these types of companies. I will also say companies like Evercade. As much as I can, I try to buy as many of the Evercade cartridges as I can. Full game ROMs. Yes, it's through sort of an emulation layer is how they kind of do things on their Evercade system. But incredible old games for game preservation. I picked up, you know, the Evercade Duke Nukem Remastered series on Evercade. 3 games right here on the cartridge that I can play right on my, and they're affordable as well. So some companies are doing it correctly, but one big company is doing it incorrectly. So thank you guys for subscribing. If you found this video useful or entertaining or anything else, please hit that like button. Please subscribe to the channel. Check out all of the other videos we have here on the channel. And I'd like to hear from you, your thoughts on this. Drop me a comment below. I try to read every comment I get. I really do. So thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time.